Well, thanks, Chase, for inviting me to speak. What I'd like to do is pull from the literature. There's not a whole lot on 6 and 7 from the big book. So I want to get into the preparation it takes to move into step 6. So post step 5 and what it says in the big book about that, and then read what it says about step 6 and 7. And then I pulled a few excerpts from the 12 and 12 around the steps. I'm not gonna read the whole chapters on those, but I pulled a few things that resonate for me from that literature. And I'll refer to that. And then I'll get into a little bit about my own story and my experience with step 6 and 7 and the results of practicing step 6 and 7 over the years. So let me dive right in. So what it says in the big book here and getting ready for step 6. It says returning home. This is returning home after doing the 5th step. Okay, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, that's step 1 through 5. We ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? So before going into step 6, it's about reflecting on all the previous steps that have come before. If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which have admitted are objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us to be willing. To me, that's the crux of step 6. It's about the willingness to let go of the defects of character. And that's about all it says in the big book about step 6 is about the willingness and praying for the willingness. Then we move on to step 7. When ready, we say something like this, and it's the 7th step prayer. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. And with that prayer, we've completed step 7. And as we'll find as we get into the 12 and 12, it's not something that you do once and done, right? I think a lot of us have experienced that. So let me dive into the 12 and 12 and pull a few things that it talks about here. And by the way, sometimes I find the 12 and 12 a little bit, the language is kind of old and it's a little bit hard for me to connect with. So, especially in reading through it again for preparing to share today, I just highlighted a few things that really resonated for me and just really sum up what the 2 steps are about. So if we ask, God will certainly forgive, and I'm on page 65 in the middle of the page, in case you want to follow along. If we ask, God will certainly forgive our derelictions, but in no case does he render us white as snow and keep us that way without our cooperation. That is something we are supposed to be willing to work toward ourselves. He asks only that we try as best we know how to make progress in the building of character. So progress, not perfection. So step 6, which is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, is AA's way of stating the best possible attitude one can take in order to make a beginning on this lifetime job. This does not mean that we expect all our character defects to be lifted out of us at the drive as the drive to drink was. A few of them may be, but with most of them, we shall have to be content with patient improvement. The key words entirely ready underline the fact that we want to aim at the very best we know or can learn. How many of us have this degree of readiness? In an absolute sense, practically nobody has it. With all the honesty that we can summons is to try to have it. Even then, the best of us will discover to our dismay that there's always a sticking point, a point at which we say, no, I can't give up this yet. And we shall often tread on even more dangerous ground when we cry, this I will never give up. Such is the power of our instincts to overreach themselves. No matter how far we have progressed, desires will always be found which oppose the grace of God. I also find in reading these two steps, it's like very heavy on higher power and God. These are like very key steps in building a relationship with my higher power as I practice these steps, involving, the 7-step prayer, the prayers for the 6th step, the emphasis that it has on the relationship I'm building with the higher power is something that comes through loud and clear in the literature. Then the last part of step 6, I'm on the middle of page 68. Many will at once ask, how can we accept the entire implications of step 6? Why, that is perfection. This sounds like a hard question, but practically speaking, it isn't. Only step 1, where we made the 100% admission we were powerless over alcohol, can be practiced with absolute perfection. The remaining 11 steps state perfect ideals. They are goals toward which we look and the measuring sticks by which we estimate our progress. Seen in this light, step 6 is still difficult, but not at all impossible. The only urgent thing is that we make a beginning and keep trying. I think that's a really key message too, that it's a constant effort toward that ideal state, rather than, just reaching it and then being done with it. Then moving on to step 7. In step 7, and again, just as a reminder, step 7 is humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. The literature talks a lot about being humble, but jumping ahead beyond that discussion, it says in the middle of page 73, when we have finally admitted without reservation that we are powerless over alcohol, we are apt to breathe a great sigh of relief, saying, well, thank God that's over. I'll never have to go through that again. Then we learn, often to our consternation, that this is only the first milestone on the new road we are walking. Still goaded by sheer necessity, we reluctantly come to grips with those serious character flaws that made problem drinkers of us in the first place. Flaws which must be dealt with to prevent a retreat into alcoholism once again. We will want to be rid of some of these defects, but in some instances, this will appear to be an impossible job from which we recoil, and we cling with a passionate persistence to others which are just as disturbing to our equilibrium because we still enjoy them too much. How can we possibly summon the resolution and the willingness to get rid of such overwhelming compulsions and desires? And then middle of page 74. But when we have taken a square look at some of these defects, have discussed them with another, and have become willing to have them removed, our thinking about humility commences to have a wider meaning. By this time, in all probability, we have gained some measure of release from our more devastating handicaps. We enjoy moments in which there is something like real peace of mind. To those of us who have hitherto known only excitement, depression, or anxiety, in other words, to all of us, this newfound peace is a priceless gift. Something new indeed has been added. There, where humility, has been added. Where humility had formerly stood for a force feeding on humble pie, it now begins to mean the nourishing ingredient which can give us serenity. There's a couple of other readings here that I was going to go into, but just in the interest of time, because I want to leave enough time for sharing, I'll speak to my own experience with it. So just a little bit of background on my alcoholic career. My alcoholism really kind of started to flourish when I was married to my drinking buddy. And rather than addressing issues in our marriage, and we had 4 young kids at home at the time, rather than dealing with life on life's terms, we would drink together and then, kind of kick the can down the road on issues that we really should be discussing or addressing head on. One thing led to the next, and after about 7.5 years, we got divorced, and I was left being a single father. My youngest kid was 3, and I spent, the next few years single, trying to figure that out, got into a deep depression, ended up in a mental institution, did not handle the divorce well. And kind of ironically, I didn't really continue to drink at that point, because I didn't have a drinking buddy anymore. And it wasn't until I got into another relationship and I felt some more of those life challenges. I was in a live-in relationship. She had 4 kids. I had 4 kids. It was chaos. And I was starting my own business at the time and working from home. And I had no idea how to handle the stress and the anxiety and the chaos in the house when it came to that. And so I started to drink on my own, and my partner at the time was not a drinker. So I didn't have a drinking buddy at that point. So I needed to learn to drink on my own. And so, I couldn't go on a work trip without getting totally wasted every night. I would be sneaking shots, in order to sleep at night, sneaking beers before we would go to social occasions, stuff like that. And so it went on like that for some time. And kind of in that situation, I recognized that I had developed certain patterns of behavior, not just the drinking, but certain avoidance patterns, especially avoidance of issues in my life, and kicking things under the rug and not dealing with them directly, and honesty issues, and stuff like that. That, as I discovered later in my step work, were really coming from my upbringing growing up in an alcoholic family. My mom was a major alcoholic while I was growing up, and ended up getting sober when I was 18 years old, after I was grown up. She's actually still sober today, but I discovered, after doing the work behind it and peeling the onion behind that a lot of these behaviors were coming from very old patterns, very old learned coping mechanisms that I had, from when I was a kid. And these were playing out in my relationships, on top of the alcohol. And so I ended up, because I did know that there was a solution because of my mom's example, I ended up without too much trouble going to an AA meeting. I decided, I know this is not going down the road. It's not going to end well. my best years of drinking are behind me, and I recognize that. So I showed up to an AA meeting. That was 15 years ago. So my first sobriety date was in August of 2011. And I actually haven't had alcohol since then. But what ended up happening for me was that I was really deep in the program at first, and I would go to meetings, and I had a sponsor, practice steps, like did all of those things, service and everything, for about 6 years. And then I gradually just started falling out of it, and I stopped going to meetings. I stopped calling my sponsor. And I didn't drink, but I did smoke weed, because I'm also a pothead besides being an alcoholic. So I thought I could do that, because at least I'm not drinking. But that behavior turned into the same problems that the alcohol brought. Doing it compulsively, doing it daily, having it lead to psychological issues, mental health issues, depression, all kinds of stuff like that. And so I got back into AA again, kind of in the late teens. And I participated for about 3 years, and I was sober again. And then in 2020 or so, COVID hit, and we went to online meetings, and I fell out of the program again, and I did it again. I followed the same pattern, and in between got into different relationships, in some ways played out the same patterns, but I feel like I had improved because of the step work that I had been doing over the years. So things weren't as bad as in the past, like in my relationships from before. But when it comes specifically to step 6 and 7, and now I have over 3 years of sobriety of not smoking weed. So I got sober in May of 2023, when I stopped smoking weed for the last time. And then and in the most recent go around of the steps, doing the step work, just resurfacing like all those old patterns in step 5, being able to document those, in step 4, and then being able to share those with my sponsor in step 5, moving on to step 6 and 7. And this is kind of how I practice step 6 and 7, is through prayer and meditation mainly. So when I'm working the steps and I'm working the program, I'll get up in the morning, and the first thing I do is, get on my knees and say the 7th step prayer. I'll also throughout the day, when I'm going into a high pressure situation, or I'm under stress or something like that, or I'm dealing with a relationship challenge, I go right to my higher power, and I ask for my defects to be removed. And I found that it's been a really good practice for me to do it that way. And then moving in to the steps, 8, 9, and up through 12, they actually come a lot easier if I'm practicing step 6 and 7 on a regular basis, and asking God to remove these defects of character, and practicing the prayer and meditation specific to those steps. So that's about all I have to share for tonight. I'd like to turn it over to the group for open discussion.